The 133rd Psalm says how good and pleasant it is for brethren to dwell together in unity. Today, on Back to Our Roots, we're going to be talking all about community. What does it mean from a biblical perspective? Stick around. Welcome to Back to Our Roots. I'm Pastor Alex Schussler.
And I'm Rachel Hyman, Minister of Music.
And we're so happy that you've joined us once again. Today, we're going to be talking about community, but a Hebraic perspective of community. You know, Rachel, growing up Jewish, which both of us did, sense of community is very important. What were your experiences with that?
Well, you know, since Jews are a minority in the world, we feel a strong need to stick together and to be there for each other. Right. That's something that I valued growing up.
Yeah, I was raised in a very large family, huge extended family, aunts, uncles, and everything. And I remember coming together at my grandparents' house. My grandmother was the one that kind of drew us all together, and there would be huge tables. And you know, growing up, one of the times when you knew you were there, you had arisen, you know, had got there, was when you got moved from the kids' tables.
Exactly, to the adult table.
To the adult table.
At Passover,
That's right, that's right. You know, even in community today, within the Jewish faith, community is such a huge thing. I live in what is predominantly Orthodox Jewish area. And I see every Sabbath all of the Jews making their way to temple, walking.
South Florida, right?
Yeah, this is in South Florida, making their way there. And you know, that whole concept, that whole idea of community and being drawn together is really solidified by the fact that, you know, to get to the temple, you can only walk. You know, they don't drive.
Exactly. So
that creates in itself this perimeter, this boundary that, you know, you can't extend beyond that. And there's wisdom to that. You know, sometimes we think about, wow, how inconvenient that would be that, you know, on the Sabbath I can't drive, I can't go anywhere.
Spend more time with family.
But exactly that, you know, it promotes that whole idea of community. And you know, the other thing about this is that there's a huge amount of pressure on Jews as a whole to stay within the community.
Yes.
I know also for me growing up, my grandmother telling me that I better not go out with any non-Jewish girls. You know, that it was all about staying within.
Stay away from the goys.
So, from the nations, being in community. Today, we're going to explore some interesting concepts and ideas that are really birthed even prior to the time that Jesus walked the earth and have made their way even into the future now. And we want to invite our resident theologian, Alexander Bolitnikov, Sasha, we call him. If you would come on out, Sasha, and join us once again. Sasha, we've, by the way, hi, Sasha.
It's nice to be with you, Alex, Rachel.
We always appreciate your thoughts.
Yeah, Sasha adds a whole different spin to our discussion. You know, Sasha, today we're talking about community and what it means from a Hebraic perspective. So let's kind of get deeper into the discussion now. And Sasha, what does the Bible, what does the Torah say as far as community and what it takes for a person to come into community? Because I know that's a very important thing to understand.
Torah specifically states that unless you are not a part of community assembly of Israel, you can't be saved.
Unless you are a part of it.
Yeah, unless you are a part. Yeah, you can't be saved. Because this is where you get saved. You are part of the community of Israel. Otherwise, you're a pagan.
Right. Now, let me clarify. We're talking about from an Old Testament perspective here, just so somebody doesn't, you know, misinterpret.
And that's why I'm emphasizing this, because it's often misunderstood. We talked about the difference between the New and the Old Testament, and it's important to understand that actually there is the same logic, but it's more symbolic.
Okay. How so?
And this is how it works. The laws of the Torah divide people into three categories.
Okay.
The people of Israel, the people who are called strangers or foreigners, and the people who are classified as sojourners.
Okay.
And there are specific words.
Okay, so explain. What does each one of those things mean?
Stranger and foreigner is a person who just is a pagan. He passes by Israel or Jewish community, Israeli community, just on a business, you know.
So it's a camel caravan.
Yeah, yeah.
Just going by.
Or he came and did something, you know, some ambassador. He's an outsider.
Okay.
He is not he's not expected to follow any commandments unless he's, as long as he doesn't commit some crime like murder or he doesn't preach and call to worship idols, you know, he's fine. But let's say this foreigner, stranger, comes into the court of gentles in the temple with some Jewish friend.
So let's explain. I mean, right away, you know, we want to make sure that people are understanding when we talk about the court of the Gentiles in the temple, so people understand the way that if we're talking about the temple, there is an area that anyone was allowed to come into.
Exactly.
Right? And then as you moved closer to the holy place and the Holy of Holies, it got more restricted, and finally, you know, of course, the Holy of Holies was only
for
the high priest. Exactly.
Yeah, but and he sees the sense that these sacrificial services, these festivals, they really point to the Redeemer. And so he says, I like this God of heaven and earth. He makes sense. His laws are good. So I want to know more. And from that on, he is no longer classified as a foreigner. He can become a sojourner. The only requirement for sojourner to start, he has to keep the Sabbath, because the fourth commandment says, and the sojourner which is in your gates.
Okay.
So he is a part of he is on his way to salvation. He is required now to follow the laws of the Torah. He is a part of the community. He gets benefits of the community. He can't lend to a sojourner with interest. To a foreigner, you can. But to a sojourner, no, you can't. So, but the difference is he still cannot go to the temple, to the altar, to sacrifice until he makes full decision to become a part of the community of Israel. And so he must circumcise all males in his household. And then at the time of Passover, this is a sacred time, because at the time of Passover, he can participate in eating the Passover lamb. And after that, he is considered absolutely equal, no matter what his ethnic, racial, culture, religious origin. As soon as he circumcised and then ate the Passover meal, Passover lamb, he is considered as the natural son of Israel. He is in the community of God.
Now, was there a typical time frame that someone would have to go, and was there additional studies or learnings in that time period that they would have to go? Or was it just the basic customs and actions that they would have to learn? Here's what you did for sacrifice. I mean, would they go through specific training? I know later that happens, but at this period, is
the
there?
rabbis always emphasized that, especially in the time of temple, a sojourner, a person who is learning, has to really understand the difference between the sacrifices and the spirit behind the sacrifices that are made to the Lord of heaven and earth, so that he would not confuse them with any pagan rituals.
Now, have they, at this point, are they required to become a student of Torah?
Absolutely. That's what they do. That's what they study. They're not allowed to take the to actually bring the sacrifice. They usually pay for some Israeli to bring sacrifice for them, but they are not allowed to offer a sacrifice until they really study all the laws of the Torah pertaining to them.
And was there some type of process that they would go to that someone, or does the Bible speak, maybe this is a better way, does the Bible speak of a point in time then when they've gone through this process of learning and studying that they, I don't want to say they're tested, but prior to someone saying, okay, you've come far enough now, it's time for you to be circumcised, we're coming up on Passover, it's time for you to eat the lamb, was that something that's discussed at all?
The Bible doesn't say it.
Okay.
It's discussed in Exodus 12 in connection with the first Passover during the time of Exodus, especially because so many Egyptians were impressed with wonders and miracles God has made, and they really made this distinction between Egyptian gods, and they wanted to follow the God of Israel. And so God said, if the foreigner wants to do it, he gave enough time for them. It was only literally 14 days to come into shape. So there was no, the story of Exodus show that there was only 2 weeks they had, but God allowed them in.
Okay, all right. So let's move forward in time now. I mentioned at the beginning of the program how the neighborhood that I live in is predominantly Orthodox Jews. So on Sabbath morning, when we're preparing to make our way to our church, which by the way, it's 25 minutes drive. It would be a long walk, okay, to get there. And this is by expressway.
That's
to the
why
church.
most Orthodox Jews live very close.
Yeah,
typically
of course.
To their temple.
And here's a really interesting thing, is very different from how a non-Orthodox Jew would think. Because even when we get into, we talked earlier about conservative Judaism and in different branches, and I'm speaking most particularly about Orthodox Jews because they're the ones that are the strictest as far as restricting driving and all of that. That, you know, typically I've had people come to me in the church and, you know, they're telling me that they're getting ready to move. They've taken a job. They're moving away somewhere. They're going to Texas or wherever it is, you know. And they tell me about, oh, I've got this new job and this new neighborhood. And it's like I never hear them saying, okay, yeah, we found a church. Or because my first connection, my first comment to them is, well, what about the faith community? You know, you had a great community here. Now you're moving away. You found a place to work. You found a place to live. But what about where you're going to go worship? And unfortunately, I think within Christian mindset, that becomes the last thing.
And that's so sad because God really wants to use fellowship and community to aid us in our salvation, aid us in the sanctification process, and sometimes we put that last. And that's dangerous even.
And that's so important. So when I look at the Orthodox Jewish community of today, it's exactly the opposite. I've seen some of the places that I go to eat are, it's great, falafels and things like that, you know, Israeli type food. And I will see little things, you know, how people take a piece of paper and they make a little flyer and you can tear off, you know, a phone number to call them or something. And I've seen where somebody is saying, I'm a new member of such and such temple. I'm looking for a place to live within walking distance. So they do exactly the opposite. They've come into an area, they've found the faith community, the synagogue that they're going to attend. Now they're looking for a place to live that's within walking distance because of these boundaries and parameters. So, which leads me to the next thing, Sasha, I want to talk about with you, is this whole idea of these community boundaries and things. And I know in some discussions you and I have had in the past, you've shared with me some really interesting things about how that was set up, and even in the time of Jesus, that these concepts and ideas existed. So as non-technical as we can be, see if you can explain what that was like to me, or what that is like.
The major issues with the community boundaries arose when, after the Babylonian captivity, Jews began to settle everywhere in the world, literally. You know, Egypt, Rome, former, you know, Tarshish, which is Spain. And so the question arose, how do we preserve the community? Because, as you mentioned, Rachel, we're always minority. Right. So they tried to settle together. And that was a very challenging thing, because you want to settle in such a way that you would be sharing things. And remember, we're not in 21st century America. We are way more than 2,000 years ago. And people live in clans. So there's a house here, house there, and usually in those conditions, people didn't have their own kitchen. They would have a communal stove, communal bathroom.
Well, and that meant that all the cooking utensils, pots, and all of that stuff, it's all shared property.
Pot, cooking utensil is an expensive thing. So one family will cook some borscht in it, and the other family, you don't want to cook some potato
Beans.
with ham.
Well, we don't think it would be any ham with it.
Yeah, so you get too close together to people who share the same values, and so and then of course Sabbath. Sabbath is the day of rest. So you come together in such a way that nobody would disturb on Sabbath. You don't want being on Sabbath, sitting, resting, and your neighbor coming in right at your window and trying to cook and bake and things like this. So what they did, they had a house here, house there. They kind of drew the perimeter where the Jewish houses were, and they would create what is called a Sabbath community domain. And
nice.
This domain would be centered. They would measure the distance from these houses so that it would be a middle. In the middle, they would place a table, and on a table they would set the pot with food. And actually, Sabbath was the time where the entire members of this domain would share food together. And often people talk about and laugh about the Sabbath way, which is not a correct interpretation. It's not forbidden in Jewish law to walk on Sabbath. It is the border of your community. That's how they say Sabbath way.
They don't go outside of that border on Sabbath.
Yeah, you don't go outside. Outside of this border, it's the secular territory. You don't want to go.
That makes so much sense, because sometimes when I'm, driving on Sabbath, and let's say my church is really far away, I see construction going on, and somebody pulls up next to me with loud banging rap music, and it really takes away from that holiness feel. So that totally makes sense. They're protecting the atmosphere of the Sabbath. I think that's really beautiful.
And the idea that they spend time together and they eat together. It's not like you come to church and you are, happy Sabbath. It was told to you at 10 o'clock and at 12 o'clock, have a happy Sabbath.
Yeah, nice to see you. See you next week.
See you later, yeah.
Yeah, and you spend only 2 hours in the community, and then you go home and you don't know what to do with your own self.
Right. So let's continue on. Now we understand, Sasha, that Jesus, he became our Passover lamb, and that idea of Passover was central as far as one of the key things that people had to do. They had to partake of the Passover lamb, right? To become part of the community. So in the context then of somebody entering into the community, as we move forward, and then we find ourselves into the book of Acts in particular.
Yeah, that was...
Because I really want to spend some time. I mean, time's moving really fast. It's getting away from us. And let's look first. The first picture, whenever I think of a biblical community, I always go to Acts chapter 2. And I always look at that Acts chapter 2, beginning at 42, and it's this idea of where they all came together and they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching. And it talks about they broke bread and God came upon them and everyone shared everything. And it seems like, we sit around and we go, oh man, only if that's the way we could live. That they just loved and even twice it comes back to the breaking of bread. They had meals together.
They were there for each other.
And this wasn't just like they traveled on Sabbath and they got together and had a Sabbath meal. This was, they were doing it all the time. And it even goes as far to say is because of the conditions that existed, in essence, God adds daily to their numbers. You know, they weren't doing evangelistic campaigns or knocking on doors or anything like that. They had established community, and
that was attractive.
And I think that one of the things that we miss and we take for granted is we read this and we go, only if we could be like this, but we take for granted the fact that, as Sasha was describing, they existed within community. That was a given. So let's move forward now. And I know, Sasha, you're jumping, you know, to want to talk. When we get to Acts chapter 15, there's some interesting things that the apostles have to deal with. Why don't you pick it up and let's spend a few minutes talking about that.
The major problem in Acts 15 is because Paul comes from what was known as Jewish diaspora.
Which, remember, that term diaspora is anyone that was, any of the Jews that were outside of Judea, which was the place, the homeland of the Jews.
And he created quite a number of Judeo-Christian communities.
Right, right.
And in Jerusalem, he is asked this question, what have you done? And the reason why, because, see, in diaspora, the things are more complicated. In diaspora, it took before, for a Gentile, from paganism to a full conversion, to become a full-blooded, equal Jew, it may have taken about from 5 to 7 years.
Right.
Wow.
Now remember, one of the things that the early church is facing is they're seeing non-Jews getting touched by the Holy Spirit, becoming followers of Yeshua. But remember, by and large, the whole community, they're all Jews, with all these established rules and taking 5 to 7 years for someone to come in, which is what leads us to this whole discussion in Acts chapter 15. What do we do?
And remember, with the scarcity of food and things like this, unless you're a member of the community of Israel, you're not sitting at the common table. That's the major issue. So the question is, how come you do it so quickly? It's impossible. And the reason for it is very simple. You have to go from paganism, you walk into the synagogue. See, it's not like in Israel he sees the temple. He walks into the synagogue, that's where the scripture is read, the Torah is read. You express your desire to go for conversion, so you learn the Torah. And when you got to your circumcision, you get circumcised, that's fine, you become proselyte. But until you actually make your pilgrimage to Jerusalem and eat from the Passover lamb, you are not equal. Right. That's what the Bible says. You're not part of the gang. You know, they try to keep the Exodus 12:45 through 48. But eat Passover lamb, and you can't do it anywhere else except Jerusalem. So this was the issue, and that's where they discussed, you know, do we really need that long of a time? Because the former Pharisees who asked this question, the Christians, former Pharisees, who asked this question, they say, you know, don't these Gentiles need to convert to Judaism before they become members of our community? And the disciples of Jesus, the apostles, they sat together, and with arguments by Peter and by James, they come to a very good conclusion that you don't have to spend that much time to become a member of the community. Let us welcome and be a part.
Right, and they follow what we understand today as the Noahide laws, is what they
not quite.
It's similar to that, yeah.
Not really. It's a little different issue, and it will take more time to explain. But they were following the elementary rules that were required for those who are considered sojourners.
Okay. All right. So, you know, for us today, this idea of community is probably the thing that's lacking the most. And I think that it's something that God's placing so much on our hearts.
Definitely.
People are lonely, and just to get together once on a Sabbath is not enough.
No.
We need to make that time to come together. So, once again, it's that time. Rachel, if you could get yourself ready, I'm going to ask you to prepare yourself. And Martine, if you would join us as well. Rachel is going to... Rachel's going to bless us with a song. Rachel, what's the title of this song today?
This is Yisimach Moshe, Moses Rejoice.
All right, let's hear it.
ישמח משה במתנת חלקו כי עבד נאמן כי עבד נאמן קראתו לו ישמח משה במתנת חלקו כי עבד נאמן כי עבד נאמן קראתו לו כליל תפארת בראש נתת לו ועוד שילחת אבנים הורי בידו וכתוב בהם שמירת שבת ישמח משה במתנת חלקו כי עבד נאמן כי עבד נאמן קראתו לו ישמח משה במתנת חלקו כי עבד נאמן כי עבד נאמן קראתו לו כליל תפארת בראש נתת לו בעודו לפניך עולה סיני ושילחת אבנים הורי בידו וכתוב בהם שמירת שבת ישמח משה במתנת חלקו כי עבד נאמן כי עבד נאמן קראתו לו ישמח משה במתנת חלקו כי עבד נאמן כי עבד נאמן קראתו לו.
Once again, Rachel, thank you so much. Martine, thank you for joining us. Sasha, well, friends, once again, time goes by so fast, and it's just been a great joy to have you with us. You know, I pray, Rachel, that people will really be moved to reach out to each other. Community is the thing that binds us. And you know, Jesus talked in John 17 that he prayed that we would be one, and that, go ahead.
Yeah, well, especially living in a sinful world, you know, we really need each other. And like the Bible says, bear one another's burdens. We need to be there to encourage each other.
Right, and by being one, that's the testimony of Jesus. That's what lets people know that he is the risen Redeemer of the ages. So as we close today, may the Lord bless you and may he keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord lift his countenance upon you and bring you his peace. Have a wonderful, wonderful day. May God be with you. On behalf of Rachel and Martine and Sasha, God bless you, and we hope to see you again on Back to Our Roots.